Hello and a very warm welcome. My name's David Roth from WPP, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to Follow the Sun, 24 hours of broadcasting right across the world to celebrate the launch of the WPP BAV Best Country Study for 2021, done in conjunction with US News and the Wharton Business School. It's a pleasure to have you join us for this section. Of course, this broadcast is going to be right across the world. We're starting in Australia and New Zealand, and we'll be ending at the end of the 24-hour period in the USA. Well, we've got an absolutely packed broadcast today, and I'd like to start off by introducing Mike Sussman from BAV. Mike has been the brainchild behind the Best Country Studies for many years, and there's nobody better to put the Best Country Study into context. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, David. We're really excited about the launch of the 2021 Best Countries study. It's the most comprehensive study of the power of nation brands. We've been doing this for 6 years, covering countries that represent 95% of the global GDP and about 75% of the world's population. So an amazing coverage. This year, we're looking at 78 countries. We spoke to over 17,000 business decision makers, citizens, and elites around the world. And we've ranked countries on a battery of metrics, including 26 key rankings that we'll talk about throughout this report and throughout the app. One thing we've seen over time is the shifting impact of soft power. It's becoming more and more important to driving the power of a country, while hard power, like banks and tanks, as we call it, the more traditional power, is becoming less impactful on the success of a nation. When we think about the power of a nation, we think about 10 key dimensions, and you can look at each of these ranks and how a country does on these things, from entrepreneurship to cultural influence to quality of life. We've introduced 2 new ones that are becoming more and more important today in these changing dynamics of culture. One of those is how socially purposeful is a nation. And the second is how agile is a nation, how responsive it's to things, particularly during a COVID era. And both of those dimensions are extremely important in driving the GDP and the success of a nation. Agile nations are seen as 3 times more likely to be a better job market. They're rated 3.2 times more likely as being economically influential. They are more connected to the rest of the world. So agile nations are doing something to resonate with people globally. Really important to mention, and it's the biggest driver now of GDP. And that's something that the nations need to be more and more of today. So when you think about agility, the top nations around the world this year are USA, number 1 in terms of being an agile country, followed by Australia, and in third place is Canada. We continue to see the rising power of purpose, not just for brands, but also for nations. In fact, purposeful nations are 57% more likely to be considered for tourism, 55% more likely to be considered as a place to do business. So it's important to be seen as a purposeful and socially responsible country. Number 1 on this purposeful dimension is Canada, followed by Denmark, and third place is New Zealand out of 78. So pretty impressive, pretty strong dimensions, very important. We also see the power and impact of brands that resonate from countries. In fact, 79.5% of citizens say that consumer brands play an important role in defining a country's culture. So there's a strong relationship between the brands and the nation. We also see that 78.6% of citizens say that the country a product is made in impacts their preference for a brand. So you can see that interplay between brand and country and how important it is today. And we started measuring the power of what does it mean to be made in a specific country. What does made in America mean, and made in China? And we can rank the power of these nations in terms of their exports. So, for instance, Germany ranks number 1 in terms of the country you'd want to buy an automobile from. They also dominate on pharmaceuticals and beer. So you can see a little bit of a balanced power of that nation. Italy is number 1 on fashion. So that's the top brand for when you're thinking about buying fashion brands. France owns cosmetics. In terms of the best countries for real estate, Canada ranks number 1, followed by the United States and then France. So overall, again, you can see how the building blocks of a nation affect its overall ranking. And we're excited to share some more details with you. Back to you, David.
Well, now it's time to get an overview of the key insights from the 2021 study on a global perspective. And who better to do that for us than Professor David Ribstein from Wharton University. Professor Ribstein has been our partner in this study since it started, and his unique understanding and unique perspective of countries, of brands, and what's driving GDP growth is unrivaled. So let's hear from David now.
Hello, I'm Dave Ribstein. I'm a marketing professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. I've been involved with the Best Country Study since its inception. This year has been a different year. It's been a transformational year. There's been many things that have affected how we view countries and how we live our particular lives. First and foremost, obviously, we've had to deal with the COVID-19 and the tragic loss of millions of lives all around the world. Accompanying this has been the huge impact on economies of various different countries, leading to an overall global recession. Some countries have handled the pandemic well, such as South Korea and Taiwan and several others, whereas other countries have not handled it nearly as well. Accompanying this pandemic has been the subsequent vaccine distribution. And this has required acquisition of vaccines as well as some form of equitable distribution of those. Perhaps Israel has been the country that has done the best at it. There are others that are catching up, but there are other countries that are still struggling today with trying to manage the vaccine distribution. A third major thing that's been happening this year has been the Black Lives movement that originated in the United States and has found it in various other countries all around the world. Climate impact has been a major event that's happened in various different countries. Perhaps the most notable are the brush fires that happened in Australia. We've seen other events, such as the explosions that happened in the Beirut port, killing millions of lives. And of course, we could not ignore Brexit and the impact that's had on the British economy, as well as the economies of Europe. Many, many events have made this year an exceptional year. And it's part of what it is that we've all had to adjust to. Perhaps the greatest impact, of course, has been the pandemic. And what we have witnessed as individuals is we see that how we buy and where we shop, that's changed. How we work, many of us working from home, some of us not having jobs. So there's been a dramatic impact for individuals, where we eat and how we interact with family and friends, dramatically affected, and we've had to adapt. Businesses have had to adapt as well. And what they have had to do is how they connect with their customers has changed. Meetings have changed. The ability to have trade shows dramatically affected. The whole supply chain has been disrupted. And certain industries, such as the hospitality industries or the airline industry, have been dramatically affected, with sporting events being canceled throughout the world. So many industries have suffered as a result. And when I've talked to business leaders, almost inevitably, what it is that they tell me is they've needed to be agile. And it sort of is the buzzword that I hear from companies. But that's not restricted to just individuals and companies. Countries have had to adapt as well. And what it is that we have seen is we see, obviously, trying to get the healthcare systems up to speed and handling with this medical crisis that we've got. And getting medical supplies to the hospitals and to individuals has also been an issue. But trying to cope with the unemployment levels and trying to deal with that and supporting the local governments has been a major issue for countries all around the world. And what countries have had to do they've had to adapt as well. Well, we too at the Best Country Study have had to go through our own adaptations. We've added 13 new attributes that we use for evaluating countries, and we have taken one of the previous dimensions, that of citizenship, and we have morphed it into a dimension that we call social purpose. And what is social purpose? It has many of the dimensions that we had in citizenship, but it also includes dimensions such as human rights and racial equality and social justice and climate concern that have all been attributes that now feed into the social purpose dimension. And we've added a new dimension. And this new dimension, this new overall factor is one of course, agility. And what is it that we have feeding into agility? Our perceptions of countries in terms of their adaptability and in terms of responsiveness and how progressive they are and how modern they happen to be and how dynamic they are, all feed into this agility dimension. So with that said, let's take a look at the latest rankings that we have.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Arthur Fleischman. I'm Group CEO for Ogilvy in Canada and also the Canadian Country Manager for WPP. We're here today to chat a bit about what makes Canadians Canadians and what makes us a great place to bring all of your money and invest in your brands here, or come on over and work here, because we're a pretty fantastic country. I'm going to let my panel introduce themselves. Let's see, I get to pick the random order, though. I'm going to start with Sarah Thompson, because she's in my upper left-hand corner of my screen. Sarah?
Hi there, everybody. My name is Sarah Thompson. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at Mindshare in Canada. I'm going to pass the baton over to Christine.
Hi there, I am Christine Ma, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Taxi, which is part of the VML Y&R network. And I'm going to throw it to Tom.
Hey everyone, my name's Tom. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Ogilvy Toronto. And because we're talking about how great Canada is today, I've worn my t-shirt depicting the greatest moment in Canadian history from the past 10 years, which is Kawhi Leonard hitting the game-winning shot in Game 7. So in case anyone was wondering about my weird shirt, that's what it is. And I will pass it over to Umar.
Hello everyone, I'm Omar. I co-lead strategy at Monomer Thompson Canada, and I don't have a Canadian t-shirt on. And I'll pass it to Sheryl.
Hi, I'm Sheryl Campbell. I'm the Chief Creative Officer at John Street, which is a advertising agency in Toronto, and I am the only Canadian who actually does not know what that t-shirt means. Sorry.
You shame us. You shame us.
I know. I've heard there was a very good shot at the basketball.
It's very Canadian of you to admit that, though.
And then apologize. Then she
apologizes
for not
it's
knowing
very
what
Canadian.
the basketball match was in the stadium. Anyway, so we're going to chat a little bit about the Canadian ranking this year. I'm going to throw the first question to Tom, just because he's got the best T-shirt on. And Tom, you saw the data. Canada always scores quite well in the best country study because Canada, of course. But this year we went from number 2 to number 1. I was once told in the Olympics, you don't win silver, you lose gold. So typically we are losers of gold. But this year we came up number 1 in 2020. And a number of the factors that drove our ranking related to quality of life, social purpose, good job market, cares about humanity, not corrupt, which I'm not really sure that, like, not corrupt, that seems like a pretty low bar to trip over, but we score very strongly on not corrupt and racial equality, things like that. Do you have a sense, or do you have an opinion on what you think might be affecting that global perception of Canada this year?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the appeals of Canada is its stability, and stability in a lot of different regards, like socially, economically, politically. And I also think that we're often compared to our neighbors to the south. And I think the fact that last year they had what could delicately be described as a very volatile year in a lot of ways. Some of that volatility was good, and some of that volatility was not good. But I think the fact that we're regularly juxtaposed with them may have influenced the fact that we moved up in our rankings. I think we are more appealing in the fact that we do have that stability, and the fact that they were so up and down in a lot of ways probably helped us in comparison.
So that was the most Canadian answer.
So Canadian.
That was so Canadian. That we won just because by default we won. So.
And I apologize for winning. We didn't intend to do that, but yeah.
Does somebody else?
And we promise not to do it again. We'll never do this again.
Do you know what I find interesting about the results of this is when you think about it, we used to say that Canada was a young country, but if you start looking at where we are in the lay of the land of age, we're actually a middle-aged person now in comparison. We are 211 out of 233 countries. We are a middle-aged country. You only start getting into Greece and Japan, who are very much older civilizations.
Really old.
Really old. So I find it really interesting that maybe we're starting to settle into our stride, but there are also some looming data points there that say we also might be about to have a midlife crisis. Who's to say? But the brands that are wrapped around us, like Germany and Switzerland, are all sort of middle-aged countries as well. Germany, while it does date back a long time, it's still in the same sphere of when we all became countries. We're not young anymore. We're doing quite progressive things in a lot of areas, to Tom's point.
So
I think, I was going to say, I think that picking up on that last word that Sarah just said, progressive, I do think is sort of, to Tom's point, we've always been kind of quiet, stable, self-effacing, potentially boring. But I think over sort of like the last 10 or 15 years, Canada has a little bit sort of found some quiet confidence and a bit of swagger. And I think that sense of progressiveness that really is the kind of bedrock of our social value system, has really come to the forefront. Definitely when you look at what's going on in Canada versus the US, there's a huge and stark contrast. But I think you can look at the rise of populism, the shakiness of democracy, some of the abandonment of progressive values that's going on in other countries around the world, most notably Western Europe. And it just feels like Canada, I think Macron said a couple of years ago that it feels like only France and Canada are the last two countries sort of defending liberal democracy. And we often say that Canada is a country defined by our values more so than a sort of deep, rich tradition or history. And I think actually right now it's more than just living our values. I think we are defending our values and kind of like move forward on the world stage and being those sort of that beacon that really is still sort of representing the best of what a vibrant liberal democracy can be.
And you're thinking that we're getting credit for that, and that might be what's driving our ranking.
I think so. Yeah.
I would also add that I think Tom talked about there's the anchoring bias as well. It was a shit show last year, and then you were talking about Brexit and everything happening. So we offer stability in all of that. That raised our profile. And also don't forget, there's the Justin Trudeau brand as well. Regardless of what's happening inside Canada, outside Canada, he's still perceived as progressive, young, all of those things, which again propelled our brand from two to number one. And I think before this call, Sarah was talking about the marketing that Destination Canada is doing. It's being nice, and Canada's going to welcome 400,000 people this year, and they've seen those messaging. So again, because we're taking their perceptions, that also kind of contributes to us being better.
I think that's a really interesting point in terms of whatever is happening inside of Canada doesn't actually necessarily get projected outside of Canada. So our brand sort of remains the same, regardless of whether our vaccines are rolling out or what a particular province might be doing. We're still seeing that news cycle doesn't happen outside of our country. Yeah.
We don't have discussions about reparations and walking back some civil liberties discussions on a global stage. We are still a beacon of that. Although even in that regard, much to what Christine is talking about, we might not be moving quickly, but we are moving forward as a country. We might not be the most progressive around climate change, but we're trying to inch forward. We just don't it's not Canadian in us to do something that's a big sweeping overhaul of anything. We are very much toe in the water. And is this lake temperature okay?
Yeah, very slow.
Well, listen, if I listen to you guys, I would think that we're number one because by comparison to the US, we're better. And because nobody knows about us, and so therefore we're sort of invisible. But there must be some things that are actions that we have taken or aspects of either our politics, our economy, our track record with environmental or societal efforts that are resonating somewhere. Like, we can't just be silent and therefore number one. We'd be middle of the pack, I think.
Yeah, I do think, and I think Sheryl made the point that there seems to be a pretty big disconnect between what is going on inside Canada and how the world sees us, both good and bad. I do think that Canada is, sort of stable and predictable, which in a sort of stormy sea can be a good thing. But I also do think that as a country, we are quite dynamic and adaptable. And in this sort of time that we're living in, where there's just massive amounts of change swirling around, not just COVID, but kind of so very many things, I do think that Canada, I think we do have a bit of a kind of startup mentality as a country, and we don't just sort of sit and wait to figure out what happens next. We kind of just roll up our sleeves and get to it. And so, I think as Sarah said, it's not like we always sort of swing for the fences. Sometimes we do play small ball, but we advance the runners quite consistently. I think we take steps that continually move us forward. I think one of the things that you can really point to as a stark difference between Canada and the US is I think continues to help us propel forward is our immigration policy. 4 years under Trump, where they were sort of locking the doors up tight, and Canada, continues to sort of throw them wide open. I think that's really helped fuel a vibrant economy as like very smart people from around the world are looking for places to go. And that's really, I think, helped fuel the drive in our tech economy, which is helping transform, I think, the overall Canadian economy to be a much more digital-based economy. So, if you are a PhD from India and you want to go to a place that's welcoming you and not making you feel like it's going to be just, weird and uncomfortable, Canada looks like a pretty nice place to land. Whereas, you've got Trump sort of saying, I'm not sure we want you here. So I think that is like 4 years that the US wasted and has really helped Canada pull forward in some really important ways.
Yeah, that cultural. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Cher.
Let us all be sorry for a while now.
Sure. Sorry. Go ahead, Cher. Sorry.
But that, there's that, like, it's persistent, and since I was in grade school, sort of that phrase of, we're a mosaic, not the melting pot. And I think to your point, Christine, that's welcoming in the sense of you don't need to come here and take on a different identity. You don't need to become something other than you are. We want what you have to make us better, not to change you. And I think that's a really big part of what
additive. It's additive. You are bringing yourself here, and you get to bring your whole self. And I think you can also see that in just how we reflect diversity and inclusion and where we are progressive. But if you think about Canada too, when you're looking at brand as a location, maybe to have a vacation or something else, but come to live, you're looking for stability. You're looking for inclusion. You're looking for, my paycheck, is it going to disappear out of my hand in a country? And Canada offers economic stability. It offers a safe haven. We have so many of those things serving us so well. And there is a reason why when we travel out of our country that we are very proud of putting a pin on our backpacks. That is a Canadian tradition. Everybody smiles at that. So
we do it so that no one will confuse us with Americans.
Well, how could you confuse me with an American based on my accent? Come on.
I also think that, like, from a tourism standpoint, by virtue of Canada just being so physically large, there's a lot of different Canadas. Like, you can go out to the East Coast and have a very unique, my wife's from Newfoundland, so I go out there quite frequently. That is unlike any experience you're going to have anywhere else in the world. And then you could go out to the West Coast and spend some time in the Rockies and have a totally different experience. And then, Quebec is its own kind of unique little world. There's just a lot of different Canadas that you can experience.
What are some of the things that you would take personally about being Canadian that you would boast about? Like, it's great to say, economic stability, but when I go visit family in the States, that isn't really what I boast most about as being a Canadian. What are the things you take very personally that are part of our brand?
Yeah, I lived in Singapore for 7 years, so I have that experience of being an expat and also sitting around, in bars with everybody bragging about, Australians saying why their country is the best, and Indonesians saying why. Everybody has their reasoning. And I think the thing that I came back to over and over and over again, also as a person who's queer, is just feeling comfortable and acceptance in this country that I have rarely felt in other places.
It's true. Like, also as a member of the LGBTQ community in Canada, you don't feel scared to walk out with your partner holding their hand as much as you can in a lot of different countries, Singapore included in that. And that acceptance is such a crucial thing, because that safety of just being yourself is an essential component of just having a quality of life.
And I would agree with that. As someone who's been in Canada for 16 years now, having a different sort of lived experience and now being Canadian, the openness and the diverseness of Canada is good. But I want to caveat that with, like, we still have work to do. Like Sarah was saying, we're still inching away. Like, we still have anti-racism, anti-Asian racism. We're still not diverse enough. We're inching that way. But even then, if this is compared to all the other countries on this, especially when I was at the bottom, we're still open, diverse, and it's okay to walk at night. Maybe not the same with women, but it's still.
Do you know what's interesting about some of the things that I was digging into, of even things like our foreign policy and peacekeeping, which we were one of the founding nations of the UN, is that we're kind of stepping back from those leadership positions in a lot of places. Christine, you talked a little bit about democracy and not to lead into politics, but we need to lean forward into these things. And it feels like, much like I said before, we're sort of a middle-aged person at this point. We need to lean in a little bit more into how we look at foreign trade, how we look at making sure democracy is thriving around the world. We've had a 13% decline in democracy around the world. Canada can and should be playing a leadership position. Where we sit in foreign aid has also had a percentage of our GDP has been in decline for the last few governments. I always am a little bit fearful, and I'd love to ask everybody else, are we heading too much into protectionists, which is also a Canadian value, or do we need to bring more of Canada to the rest of the world in the way that we operate as a country and a government on the world stage?
I mean, I think in the Trump years, we retrenched a little bit. I think everyone kind of turtled a little bit to just sort of protect themselves. And I feel like just in the early days of the Biden administration that, Canada has once again found a sort of willing partner to come back out of the shadows and really sort of stand up loud and proud to defend some of the values of democracy, and be more confident in wielding our sort of soft power. But I agree with you. Like we've played that role for a long time, but then sort of got a bit timid. And I think it is important. I think that it is something that is uniquely Canada, is how do we, we don't show up with a tank, but we do like wield quite a lot of influence in the world, and that is what the world needs, is more talking, less fighting.
To me, I wish that Canada was like the therapist on Couples Therapy on HBO.
Go ahead, Umar.
I was just saying that's so unique to Canada. Like, we don't have the American exceptionalism mindset, so we're not there to police the world. We have that soft power, and I agree with Sarah. We have stepped back, and I think that's kind of Canadian, where we're diverse, we're in our little bubble, and we're getting more and more into our bubble, saying, let them live kind of thing. But I think we could make strides in helping the world become more democratic, become more liberal, as Sarah was talking about.
So this doesn't totally surprise me, I guess, although it does deeply offend me that while we are seen as all these wonderful things, we're so socially, progressive, and we're so modern and caring, but we're decidedly not sexy, which I take personal offense because
Justin Bieber, come on,
look at these, right? But what do you think drives that? What do you think creates this perception that Canadians are, not particularly different, not particularly cultural, not particularly dynamic? What are the behaviors we exhibit? What are the things we have done? Like come on, did anyone see Justin without his shirt?
But I think the biggest contributor.
Why would we think we're not a sexy people?
I think the biggest contributor to that is, as we started off with, Tom was talking about our neighbors to the south, is that those things get exported so quickly. If you look at so much of our big names, celebrity names, or even sort of our most innovative companies, they immediately their biggest ambition is to get into the American market, number one.
Yep.
And once they get into that market, it's co-opted. And suddenly it's gone, and it's not. We've never been made in Canada has never been the big stamp that you see across everything, but it should be. I mean, it's proven over and over again that brands that have that are perceived as, being of higher quality, made properly with good work ethics and all those sorts of things. So, but I think it does get co-opted immediately sort of into the US because that's what we aspire to.
Yeah, I feel like we're not great. I feel like we're great at contributing to culture, but we're not great at creating culture. Like, I think it was maybe 2 years ago where Spotify put out their annual streaming numbers, and 3 out of 5 of the top streaming artists were Canadian. It was Bieber, Drake, and The Weeknd. And like, that's kind of a proud moment for Canadians. Like, those are 3 of the biggest stars in the world. But if you look at like the genre in which those artists exist, it's American genres of music primarily, right? So like, we're good at like putting our stamp on things. I know historically, like, we Canadians have always prided ourselves in being able to export like great comedians. But you're absolutely right, Cher. Like, the first thing they do is they'll go down to Second City, or down to Saturday Night Live, or whatever it is, right? Like, as soon as they get their shot, they're out of here. I'm not sure why that is. I guess just the audience is so much bigger down there.
I think it's a confidence issue.
I think that's part of it. I also think part of it is the sort of the good side and the downside of multiculturalism is that our culture isn't singular. It is very multifaceted. And so I think it's sometimes hard to define what exactly Canadian culture is. That sort of, we don't have this like well-recognized cultural imprint that you can quickly conjure up in your mind. What is British culture? What is French culture? What is Japanese culture? Even, what is American culture? Canada, we're a little more amorphous. And so I think when you're a little more amorphous, it's hard to kind of get the credit for what you bring to the party.
Yeah.
Christine, that's an interesting thought, and we didn't dig into that, but for the audience that is less familiar with Canada, we actually have several very strong cultures, right? We have Indigenous culture, we have French culture, we have Anglo culture. Does anyone want to just comment on that a little bit, just for clarity? Because while the US has Hispanic and Latin culture, also has Indigenous culture, it's not quite as markedly defined as it is in Canada. I mean,
we have Asian Pacific would be the next biggest group in our country, which is a massive amount of immigration comes to our country from the Philippines and China,
Southeast Asia,
Southeast Asia. So we are dynamic in that regard, and it's the part about that I love about it too is just what it creates from a food as well, is that in Canada, the diversity of food is like, we want to eat your food. we want to eat it all. And this is the thing that is, even when you talk about our identity from a culinary identity, the thing that we sit around a table and enjoy, anything can be on that table. We often land in a place of maple syrup and poutine, but Canada is no longer that, and you can see it in the culinary dynamic that we've had.
So it's interesting that the diversity, that that the welcoming nature of the country that brings in so many populations, inadvertently dulls the point about what Canada actually looks like. Because we are so diverse, we are not a homogeneous population with a homogeneous culture and a homogeneous history, where we are quite a mosaic.
I think so stems from our modesty too, though. Like, if you think of the Quebecois culture, and I say this as a Anglophone, but like, it feels a bit insular to me. It feels as though they're not overtly trying to like take that culture out into the world. They certainly welcome people in for the most part, and if you want to come in and experience Quebecois culture, great. But they don't seem overly interested in like, sharing that outwardly with the whole world.
Sort of like the come from away too of the Atlantic Canada.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and that's borne out in that research, which shows that Canadians don't really see themselves as citizens of the world as much as they see themselves as citizens of Canada. Yeah. Right. So we tend to be.
That was the one data point I have to say I found a bit surprising. Relatively speaking, because I feel like we are not sort of a homogeneous culture, and because so much of Canadians have come from elsewhere and still have a strong connection back to from where they came. And I think also as a country, we travel quite extensively, like a lot more than many other countries, particularly the United States. And I feel like as a country, we're also quite outward looking. We might not project out who we are to the world, but I do feel we are quite outward looking. So I have to say that was the one data point that I was surprised by.
I actually flipped
But don't
it on
you think
its
that's
head.
just our modesty? Sorry, don't you think that's just our modesty that doesn't allow us to answer yes to that question?
Yeah,
Like,
maybe.
But I think it's also our exploration. Like we want to your point, Christine, get passport in hand faster than those south of the border. We want to go and explore other nations and see how they're doing it. We have an openness to that. We want to see what else is out there. We want to explore it. We don't believe that we have it 100% right 100% of the time. And I think that's also essentially Canadian. It's sort of a little bit more fluid. I'm happy to go to another country and live and breathe in what they are doing and not sort of in what I am bringing. And I think, versus other countries where I expect to see the McDonald's on the corner when I go to Italy, I don't want that. And I don't think a lot of Canadians want that. We want to immerse ourselves into what you are doing, not be, bringing what we're doing and making you assimilate.
I will say I do find our modesty to be a hindrance at times. Like, I like that we're like a modest country, but like, I think of like in our world in advertising, sometimes I feel like we like think small initially, and we really have to push ourselves to think big, like we don't take necessarily the big swings that you see coming out of some of the other regions in terms of their advertising, where it's like, oh my God, I mean, it could be a function of just we've been drilled in that like we don't have the money that the other guys do, so like let's right size this idea. But I find that at times our modesty can be a bit of a hindrance in terms of not taking those big swings.
We're also really scrappy in our industry. We're also very scrappy.
That's
like
true.
People figure it out with small budgets of what you could possibly do. We have people that have like multiple skill sets in multiple areas and aren't just like one thing. They're pretty dynamic, and in advertising and marketing that fosters some of the best talent because you're not thinking of like, this is my thing and this is all I'm going to focus on.
You're absolutely right. We get a whole different type of really cool ideas, and it's ideas that are quite scrappy, and we figured out a way to do a thing that got a bunch of buzz with no money, and like I think that's awesome. But you don't see these big sort of
$2 million extravaganzas
that you do coming out of like.
Well, we did. It came from BlackBerry.
Wow, short-lived. So we're going to be running out of time in a couple of minutes. I just want to turn the conversation just a little bit. If you think about other countries' brands that might think about coming to Canada, or other talent that might think about coming to Canada, what would make this a great environment? If you think, wow, we're only the size of California as an entire country, you have to deal with 2 languages, a fair bit of regulation. Why would a French brand, a Chinese brand, why would they come to Canada? What would be the opportunity for them?
We're the best test market in the world for anything. This is where you get exactly what you need to figure out whether or not it's going to fly somewhere else. We have always been the best test market. Always.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, and there are examples like Uber Eats and Uber Pool. A lot of the things were tested in Canada before it got rolled out in other markets. If you're a marketer, come here. We're 38 million people. Like Arthur said, we're, same size as California. We're cool, sexy, and trendy too.
Despite what other people think, Umar.
Yeah, I'm saying like the brands like Shopify and the Lululemons of the world and the Canada Goose of the world, like we've given those to the world. So those big brands established here. And if you're a marketer, come here, and we're cheaper if you're in the US. And if you're a talent, again, like the conversation of us being open, big cultural hubs, food scene, big tech scene, and you can raise a good family here. So those I would encourage people to consider Canada.
I would say on talent, like I think Tom just made the point, but on talent, having again worked abroad, the narrowness that you can encounter in larger markets of this is your lane and you should stick to it. You don't encounter nearly as much in Canada, and you have the opportunity to expand and understand a lot about a wider swath of things and work problems all the way through a system rather than just sort of stick to what you know.
We're really curious people. We're actually a very curious nation, and I think that's not reflected enough. We're very curious about what's going on and how we can solve problems. There's an essentially Canadian value of curiosity.
We don't have we're not known to be entrepreneurial, and I'm kind of curious about that. We have this very high trust in our government. And so you made a comment earlier, Sarah, about paternalistic. Is it a paternalistic culture where we just assume...
Yeah, we have an identity crisis. We have an identity crisis here. You can see headlines where we will say something like, there was a few years ago, Canadian Business had one that Canadians don't think big. And then we have but we're the biggest compared to Silicon Valley for hiring. We just have an identity crisis in this space. Are we in or are we out? It's just bad. It's bad marketing.
Yeah.
Just bad.
I actually think we are quite entrepreneurial. It's just not in the sort of big brash sort of American exceptionalist way. I mean, if our economy, I think it's something like 80% of our economy, people are employed at companies of less than 50 people. We are not a big head office, big corporate culture. I think people do sort of get out there and sort of create their own fortunes. It's just we're modest about it. So that's why I think we maybe don't have the most sort of entrepreneurial reputation. But I actually do think we're doers.
We need to celebrate more risk takers in our culture. We don't do that enough.
That is the one part where I would say from a government structural policy standpoint, that's one part where I think government policy doesn't help us. We don't have sort of a great support system when it comes to things like patent protection and copyright infringement and, sort of a funding pipeline to help fund innovation. We're sort of all over the map there. And so I think there's an innovative spirit, but I'm not sure that Canadian government makes it that easy.
Well, thank you all. That was more opinion than we usually hear from a group of Canadians over the course of 40 minutes, but they were good opinions and very, very well articulated. So thank you all for the time. Thank you all for listening. Come on to Canada and bring your purse.
Well, thank you all very much indeed. To celebrate this very special launch, we've created a very special app. It's a virtual reality experience where you can literally visit every single country that's featured in the 2021 study. Well, you can get it on your desktop, your laptop, your tablet, your mobile phone. All you need to do is just download it from the URL that's on the screen here. Enjoy, explore. It's full of interest and insights, and we'll be refreshing the content frequently over the course of the next few months. So please do go back frequently. Earlier, I talked about the significance of countries being seen as brands. This is being increasingly realised right across the world, not just by business leaders, but by governments at the most senior of levels. I caught up with the Prime Minister of the Netherlands and asked him how important he believes country brands are. Mr. Prime Minister, what contribution do you think that retailing makes to the economy and society in general?
So many. I mean, it is the biggest employer in the Netherlands. 900,000 people are somehow connected to the retail sector, so it is huge in its economic impact. That means that many people, in many cases young people, start their working life experiences in the retail sector. It is also a place where you can learn how to be more entrepreneurial and how to start your own business. It is a sector in our economy which is very much focused on innovation and disruptive innovation. It is very much connected to the modern economy, to the internet, to online shopping. So there are so many positives. And it's also a place where people come together. It's also a sort of community place. In some of the stores, people drink a cup of coffee, meet friends, and then buy some stuff. So it has many, many impacts on society.
Mr. Prime Minister, you had a fantastic career at Unilever. You obviously know brands very well. Do you think country brands are as important as product brands?
Oh, they're crucial. And what I found in this job is that the brand of Amsterdam, the brand of the Netherlands, the brand of Eindhoven, or the whole commercial area around cities like Zwolle and Amersfoort are crucial for our international standing. And the fact that you can bike to school as a child, that it's relatively safe here, that there are so many possibilities when you like sports or culture. And I really learned to brand that much more than we did already.
One last question, Mr. Prime Minister. What advice would you give retailers today who are under a lot of pressure, under a lot of stress? Everything's changing very fast.
Yeah, but still, at the same time, you are in a fascinating sector. So enjoy what you are doing. We live only once. This is the real thing. This is not the. So you have to make the best of it. And there are so many opportunities for good salespeople, for good businessmen and women, to make use of all those opportunities which are out there. And do realize that you play a very important part in societies. You are really part of society.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Wow, I can't believe it. We've come to the end of our broadcast. We're almost out of time. I'd like to thank everybody who participated in today's broadcast. And just to remind you again, please do download the app and enjoy going virtually into every single one of our countries in this year's 2021 Best Countries Study. So from me, David Roth, thank you very much indeed. And Mike, thank you very much indeed as well.
My pleasure. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
Well, have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We really appreciate it.